Welcome to Peninsula Seniors Out and About. Today we're at the Western Museum of Flight in Torrance for one of their celebrity lectures. Let's go see what Cindy has for us today.
Welcome everyone to the Western Museum of Flight. A lot of historical war stories evoke excitement and romance because it took place in an exotic location, in desperate times, and heroic individuals stepped forward to achieve what had to be done. All of these things are true, but as always in warfare, there is a gritty reality of the real dangers, the real mishaps, and the real losses. Only someone who has experienced that romantic, historical time can properly put together the romantic history and gritty reality. Fortunately today, we have someone who did live in that reality, who did what he had to be done, and he is here today to share those experiences with us. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to introduce Lieutenant Dave Hayward.
At first, I would like to mention that about a month ago, I made a presentation of this type at a park over in Fountain Valley, near where I live in Huntington Beach. And I happened to look around and see some plaques there that were given in recognition of the efforts made by veterans who served in World War II. And there were 11 words on that plaque I'd like to read to you. They possessed the inner strength and courage that kept them going. They were, of course, speaking of those who served in World War II. And when I read those words, it made me think that, gee, that's what my experience was all about. It was a matter of just keep going and get the job done. It was a matter of challenges, one challenge after another, and it was a matter of meeting those challenges and, as I say, getting the job done. When I was 19 years old, that's what I looked like. I grew up in Pasadena, California. I had a 1934 Ford V8 that I was very, very fond of. As we know, the World War II started December 7th of 1941, and able-bodied persons like myself realized that they were going to have to serve one way or another. So it was a matter of should I enlist and do something I'd like to do or might learn something worthwhile, or should I wait and be drafted, take a chance on being a foot slogger in the infantry? There's nothing wrong with the infantry. I don't want anybody to be offended with that remark, but it's awfully nice to go into something that you might get some benefit out of yourself. Or the third possibility is to try and get a deferment by, say, working for Lockheed Aircraft, near where I was, bucking rivets and building airplanes. But there was no guarantee that that would last for very long, so I might as well face up to things. And what I did, let me ask for a showing of hands. How many people ever felt they'd like to learn how to fly an airplane? I thought so, everybody. Well, I had seen virtually every movie that had to do with airplanes, and to me, that's what I wanted to do. So I figured, well, I'll take a chance and see if that's for me. One thing that helped was that in the year 1942, I kept a diary. Many times I thought, well, maybe I better throw that darn thing away, because maybe there's things in there that'll be embarrassing later in life. But I did not throw it away. I kept it for some reason. And then it occurred to me about a year ago, wouldn't it be nice to put together all of the information I have, my diary and my photographs, my photograph album, my pilot's log, the history of our squadron as it operated overseas. Fortunately, those records were all brought back and stored at Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama. So I was able to get a CD that gave me all the details of what our squadron was doing. And then since then, we formed a veterans group and held annual reunions. And I was appointed secretary-treasurer, and I put out a quarterly newsletter. In fact, there's some copies of it on the table back there if anyone is interested in getting a copy. And in doing so, I wrote a number of stories. So what I did about a year ago was to put all of this together into one book. It has a blue cover, and it's called A Young Man in the Wild Blue Yonder. Wild Blue Yonder, of course, was taken out of the first line of the Air Force song, Off We Go Into the Wild Blue Yonder. I had two very close buddies, and we all agreed that we were going to try and get into the Air Corps, and we're going to try and take the flight training program. I'm the one on the left side. The other two people, they tried, but they got washed out of flying school. The one in the center went into the Coast Guard, survived the war. The one on the right became a bombardier into B-17s. He flew missions over Germany in the 100th Bomb Group, and it's a miracle that he survived, but he did. So the three of us all got through the war okay. My first assignment was at Santa Ana Army Air Base, near where I live in Huntington Beach. Right now it's the site of the Orange County Fairgrounds and the Orange Coast College. So I went there to be indoctrinated into the Air Force. We called it the Air Corps in those days. And the first thing they did was give us shots, all kinds of shots for tetanus and everything you can think of. One of our pilots was an excellent caricaturist, and one of our books there particularly has a lot of his caricatures in it. It's the one with the gray cover. It's called World War II Diary. And there we were marching at Santa Ana Army Air Base in March of 1942. It rained a lot that month. The base had just opened and they didn't have anything for us to do except to go out and march and get shots in the arm, which both of those things happened. Oh yes, they also put us on KP duty, kitchen police. So I found myself peeling potatoes and washing dishes. And well, that's the way it is in the Air Corps, and you might as well in the Army, the Navy, Marine Corps, all of them. You just have to get used to it and learn that they have a different way of operating than we normally do. Then it was off to primary flying school. I mentioned a minute ago the challenges. Well, believe me, there was a challenge every day. The biggest challenge was how to keep from getting washed out, because nobody wants to have that happen to them. You just had to learn how to be very smooth on the controls, no jerky motions of any kind, and you had to keep the head moving like this. They said your head has to move like an owl. Well, an owl can move its head, I think, 180 degrees, or at least so I've been told. We couldn't quite do that, but we had to do the best we could. And it was really quite a morale booster to put on that white scarf and that leather jacket. And you've recognized this airplane. There's one within almost spitting distance across the way there. It's a Stearman biplane, and it is a beautiful airplane to fly. You can do acrobatics in it, go and fly it loop to loop and around and upside down and straight up and straight down, and it was just a lot of fun to fly. They taught us acrobatics. You might wonder why. Well, maybe they didn't know. Maybe we'd be going into fighter pilots training, but it was sure a lot of fun to go through all that. And you've seen this one out there on the flight line too. We called it the Vultee Valiant, commonly known as the Vultee Vibrator. It was a step or two above the Stearman in that it had variable pitch propeller, in the sense it had two positions. One was very loud and the other was not so loud. And that's where we learned how to do night flying. Oh gosh, I can still remember the first time I did a solo landing at night. Well, they told us to always be in control of this airplane, never let it control you. But I'll have to admit that there was about a 5-second period coming in for a landing at night in that airplane, and I can honestly say that I did not feel I was in complete control of that airplane, but somehow it landed, and I'm here today. Oh, and then we went on to the HC-6, the North American. That was a beautiful plane. There are a lot of those flyable today, and that was, again, it could do great acrobatics. It was a great airplane to fly. We flew that one down at Williams Field, Arizona, near Phoenix, but the Stearman we flew at Tulare, California, and the Vultee Valiant at Lemoore, California. Another plane that they taught us to fly there at Williams Field is Cessna, and we called that the Bamboo Bomber. It was twin engine. That's the only thing unique about it. So we learned how to fly twin engine airplanes and learned how to have a co-pilot with us. And then the great day came and we graduated and got our second lieutenant's bars and we got our wings, and boy, we really felt, you talk about challenges, there have been so many challenges up to that point, you can't believe, and each one, fortunately, I managed to get through okay. I was hoping that I'd be able to meet the next one that would come along, and certainly there were plenty of them ahead. And that was the B-25 medium bomber. They called it the Mitchell. They sent us to South Carolina to train in that one, Greenville, South Carolina. It had a crew of 5, and in that one we did a lot of cross-country work down to Key West and over to Louisiana, up to New York and all around in them. The main challenge there was to have a crew assigned to you in which the pilot was in charge of the crew, and that brought great responsibility because you're responsible for getting the airplane and the crew back safely again after accomplishing whatever mission you were sent out to do. Okay, then we were sent overseas, and it was early enough in the war that our crew was put on a Pan American posh airliner with a Pan American crew, and we were sent to India. We left Morrison Field at West Palm Beach, Florida, went across the Caribbean down into Natal, the most easterly part of Brazil, across the Atlantic Ocean, stopping at a little island called Ascension Island in the middle of the South Atlantic, island that belonged to the British. And the British had recently put a landing field that would accommodate large airplanes. And on to the west coast of Africa and to Karachi, which is now Pakistan, and into India. This is an interesting map of the China-Burma-India theater where we operated. If you can visualize on that map where you see India and you see Calcutta, that's about where we were stationed. And the purpose of our being sent there was, it was a long line of gotcha situations. America was determined to keep China in the war for several reasons. One, that there were somewhere between 1 million and 2 million Japanese troops tied up in China that were occupying China. And doing so, the Chinese were subject to these Japanese having closed all of the ports of China so that China could not get any supplies except this one avenue, and that was the old Burma Road area across from northeast India into southwest China. So the Japanese were intent on closing that last supply route, and so they invaded Burma in 1942, and they moved in some fighter planes into the very northern part of Burma. And these fighter planes were attempting to shoot down our cargo planes that were flying the hump, as we called it. That's a branch of the Himalaya Mountains that extends north and south between India on the west, China on the east. So the Japanese were in there with their fighter planes to try and shoot down our cargo planes. So we were brought in there to intercept the Japanese supply lines that were supplying these fighter planes so that the fighter planes would not get fuel and not get ammunition and not get any material they needed to carry on what they were doing. So it was just, as I say, a game of gotcha that each party was trying to come up with something that would trump the other party. So that was one reason we're trying to keep China in the war, two reasons. Those 1 or 2 million Japanese troops that were there to occupy China. If they weren't there, they could very well be down in the Southwest Pacific fighting our Marines. Then also there was we were there for another reason, to cut down Japanese supply lines anywhere we could find them. They might be in the Bay of Bengal ships, or they could be along the east coast of China. And eventually, perhaps, the Americans might launch an invasion of Japan from China. That was a possibility. And then I will say, too, one final thing about that our Air Forces helped the Chinese Army in 2 places to drive away the Japanese invader. Okay, so that just is a brief idea of why we're there. It took us about 2 or 3 weeks to fly to India, because the Pan American crew had to have a rest at night and the airplanes had to be maintained. One of the most interesting stops we made was at Agra, India, where the Taj Mahal is located, and that's me sitting on a bench, and the Taj Mahal has a scaffold on its dome at that time. It's a very beautiful structure to see if you ever get a chance to see that. This is what our camp looked like at Chakulia, India. Again, it was 100 miles west of Calcutta. It was very hot, very humid. We had the monsoon storms come through with the thunderstorms. Typically, the clouds start forming about noon, and late afternoon it would be raining. And then finally, sometime during the night, the storms would go away. So our schedule was to take off early in the mornings while the weather was good and try and get back again from our combat missions before the clouds moved in. It was an area where there were a lot of snakes, where malaria was a problem, a lot of malarial-bearing mosquitoes. And the natives walked through the grounds at all hours of the time of day. They operated the water pumps, these squeaky water pumps with the handles they have to push up and down that go on 24 hours a day. And we lived in structures such as the ones you're looking at. They're mud walls, thatch roofs, open windows and doors. It was not the best of living conditions. We were fed on a reverse lead lease situation where they sent us what they called bully beef from Australia. We had one night, and then the next night we would have what you might call chicken curry and rice. The chicken was as tough as nails. We would see the turkey buzzards flying over in the day and then figure, well, that's what we're going to have for dinner tonight. And it very well could have been. The only beef, we couldn't have cow beef, but we could have water buffalo beef, and it was as tough as nails because they didn't have any way to do refrigeration or aging of meat. This is kind of overdone, but we call them bearers, B-E-A-R-E-R. A bearer is a servant that waits on you. They weren't quite that fancy, but at least we did have that advantage of the bearer. And then that little native village next to us was extremely primitive, very, very primitive. It really did not attract us to go in and inspect the town at all. This was our crew after we had been in India about 3 months, and normally our crew would consist of 5 or 6 people, but 2 of them were missing there. When our crews arrived in India, the first thing the management did there was to divide us up so that we could all fly with more experienced crews for a while. So I was fortunate enough to meet one of the challenges of becoming a first pilot in charge of the crew, but I had to sit in the right seat as co-pilot for several missions until I kind of got used to the idea of the tension and so forth that goes on. Well, unfortunately, the co-pilot was with another crew one day when they were given the instruction to go out with the 3 airplanes late in the afternoon just before dusk, because supposedly a Japanese merchant vessel had been spotted out on the Bay of Bengal. So they were sent out. When they got there, they found it was not a Japanese merchant vessel at all. It was a Japanese cruiser. But the lead plane went in and made an attack anyway, even though he said the sky was just all lit up like the 4th of July with anti-aircraft fire and searchlights. But the lead plane went in, successfully made his run, turned around, The second plane was the one that my co-pilot was on, and it was unfortunately shot down, and the crew and plane were lost. So, and the third plane came back to the base and said, "Cruiser? I didn't see any cruiser. I didn't see anything." So we don't really know what happened to that third guy. Anyway, but he did get home, and I do not know the answer of what happened really there. We lost the co-pilot soon, and then another one we lost when he was with another crew that flew over a railroad junction in central Burma near Mandalay and was shot down, and they lost the whole plane and the whole crew. So we were down to 4 people. Oh, and then the man in the front row on the right, our flight engineer, decided he didn't want to fly anymore. So that's fine, nothing against him for that at all. So they made him a mechanic on the ground, and we relied very heavily on our mechanics, as you can very well imagine. Just really had to rely on them to keep our airplanes flying, and he did a fine job, and that's the way it should be, because if a fellow doesn't want to be up there, you don't want to force him to be there. He's just not going to be cooperative at all. As I said, our main mission there when we flew out of India was to attack enemy supply lines, and that meant bridges and railroad facilities, and it meant airfields, and anywhere the barges on the river, anything the enemy might be using to supply, say, the fighter planes that are further north up in Burma. So this is what we call the Maitinj Bridge on a tributary of the Irrawaddy River near Mandalay. We're flying from about 10,000 feet at this time, and you can see that a previous mission had knocked out the bridge. And incidentally, the bridges didn't stay knocked out very long. The Japanese are very good at going in and reconstructing them. And I think on the day this picture was taken, you can see a puff of white in the upper middle part where we're bombing the warehouse, the dock facilities, barge facilities along the edge of the river. And this will give you an idea. We were flying at 10,000 feet about, and we had a lot of anti-aircraft fire. Again, this was drawn by my friend. His name is John A. Johns. To give an idea that this pilot was just not going to take it lying down. He was going to cuss out those wicked Japanese for the terrible thing they were doing to his airplane. I might say that when an anti-aircraft shell like that goes off, it sounds a little bit like if you were standing there with a shotgun and there was a tin outhouse, a galvanized iron building of some kind in front of you, and you shot against that galvanized iron. Well, that's about what it sounds like when a shell goes off just underneath your airplane. Now, you hope that it's not going to knock the airplane down. Our B-25s were pretty rugged. There were not too many vulnerable places on the plane. The pilot had a piece of armor plate under his seat and behind his back. The fuel tanks were all self-sealing, and the radial engines that we used were not very vulnerable to being hit like, say, an inline engine with a water-cooled system, with a liquid-cooled system would be more vulnerable. Here we are going after a railroad yard from about 10,000 feet, and you can see boxcars and railroad cars. If you could knock out a locomotive, just one locomotive, that was a pretty good accomplishment, because that just meant there's one more train that's not going to get through. On one time, our squadron asked for a volunteer crew to go up into northeastern India and do a couple of things. One was to fly a single plane mission against the supply line going into where the Japanese fighter planes are located, a place called Michina in North Burma. And so the pilot I was flying with volunteered, and he said, "Do you want to go?" And I said, "Sure." Life can be very boring, as most of you who've been overseas or in the service know. At times very boring, and you'll volunteer for almost anything just to get a little change of pace. So I said, "Sure, I'll go along." We ran 4 missions there in the Michina area of northern Burma, and that's the only time we had fighter escort. These are P-40s. I took that picture myself out the window of the B-25. This is another picture showing bombing along the Irrawaddy River, the dock facilities there, because we were anxious to knock out barges, ships on the river, anything we could find that was helping the enemy. Well, also we would drop propaganda leaflets in Burma to try and convince them they should not aid the Japanese, they should come on over to our side. Okay, while we were up there in the northern part of India on this single plane mission, one day a colonel came by and saw our B-25 out there on the field, a place called Dinjan, Assam province, India. He saw our airplane and he said, "I would like to borrow your airplane." And he said, "We've had stories that there's a Japanese radio station up here high in the Himalaya mountains of Tibet that's luring our cargo planes off course and causing them to crash in the mountains." So he asked the pilot, I was still flying co-pilot, the pilot, "Do you want to go?" And he said, "No, I don't want to do that." So he asked me and I said, "Oh yes, yeah, I'd like to do that. That sounds like a pretty interesting thing to do." So the colonel and I and 8 other people in an airplane that should only carry 5 or 6 took off, and we flew high up over the mountains of Tibet. And you're looking now at a picture I took myself at 20,000 feet, and you can see the mountains are about the same altitude we were flying, and you can't see it, but off in the left-hand corner in distance would be Mount Everest, the highest mountain in the world. So that was really an experience for me. One of my favorite courses in Pasadena Junior College, where I went, was geology, and I was really excited about the glaciation process. And I said, if I could only tell my teacher now that I've seen the biggest glaciated valley you could imagine, bigger than Yosemite, and the hanging tributaries and the meandering stream in the bottom of the valley, the whole thing is just textbook. And I really, of course, I was also thinking, what would happen if we had engine failure here? What would we do? Well, we'd have to land in that valley down there somewhere, but would anybody know where we were, or would anybody come looking for us? Well, to make a long story short, we did not find the radio station, the alleged radio station, and I think it turned out that the colonel was just off on a boondoggle with his buddies, because we only had 5 or 6 oxygen outlets on the airplane, and obviously the pilot and I both had all the oxygen we wanted, and the other balance of the people had to rely by taking turns with a few oxygen outlets left, and I understand they all had splitting headaches that night. It served them right. They used up a lot of good 100-octane gasoline, but they all had a day, including myself, had an experience that we would never forget. Of how many people can say they've flown over the high Himalaya mountains of Tibet and seen it all there? That was the scariest thing that happened to me. You talk about your challenges. And my very first mission, this happened to me. I was flying again co-pilot. We had 9 airplanes. We went after an airfield in central Burma where the Japanese had fighter planes. We dropped our bombs on their airfield, turned around and headed home. And just as we turned, I looked out my window and I could see airplanes down there. They're obviously not ours. I counted as many as 21, but there probably were many more than that. They were both fighters and bombers, and they were heading westerly as we were, gradually getting higher and higher until finally they came up to our level. And our airplane had recently been repaired from a belly landing, meaning a landing that was made with the wheels not down but up. And it had been repaired, and consequently it was just a little slower than all the rest of the planes in our squadron. So we were flying at the tail end Charlie, and here we were soon to be a straggler, left all by ourselves out there. The rest of the squadron had gone on ahead, probably not realizing we were back there, because I tried calling on the radio and it was just so much jabber you can't believe. So we were left all alone, a straggler, and all these Japanese airplanes. Finally, our gunner called up and he said, "Sir, there's a Zero out here doing a slow roll, and I can't get a shot at him. He's in our blind spot." So pretty soon I looked out my window and I saw that it's a Japanese Oscar, and I found out since the war that it's true that at that field in central Burma, there was a squadron of Japanese Oscars, and they looked just exactly like that. So that was with the same markings that are on that plane. So that's the view I had as I looked out the window, and I could see the silhouette of the pilot there. And it made me kind of think about two or three things. Again, I was just a young kid trying to grow up, and I thought, well, gee, here's a fellow out there. He's probably come from a good family. He's probably had the same training I've had to fly an airplane. He's possibly had a year or two of college like I have. And he's out there doing the best he can for his own country, and I'm doing the best I can for my own country. And I had the strangest feeling about looking out and seeing that plane out there. And I also had another thought that I thought, you know, sometimes in life there are things worrying about, and sometimes there are things in life that are really not worrying about. And if I had to grade this one, I would say this is definitely one of those things worth worrying about. Is this guy going to shoot us down or not? Apparently our gunners couldn't get a shot at him. I guess maybe he was just barely out of any accurate range and they couldn't do it. But anyway, there he was. Well, the story is told in my book back there, but obviously I'm standing in front of you today, so he did not shoot us down. I think really probably what happened, one of two things. Either we know that they were on a mission themselves to go to India and bomb probably Chittagong, and that they were probably told, the fighter pilots were probably told, don't go out looking for trouble somewhere. Your job is to protect your own bombers. Either that, or they felt they had lost the element of surprise, because by that time certainly our radio operators had radioed ahead and say, hey, there's a whole bunch of Jap airplanes here heading your way. You better get your fighter planes in the air. For some reason he went away, and so anyway, he teased us and scared the bejesus out of us, but that was about it. And that's what it felt like when you land after something like that, getting out and kissing the ground. One of the things that nobody could have expected was one day two of our airplanes were up near our base and practicing their formation flying, and the two planes ran into each other on a tight turn, and that can happen, as you know, people who have flown. And so both the planes crashed and everybody on there was killed. And it was unfortunate, particularly because some of the clerks and the officers said, hey, you people all wanted to fly in a B-25 sometime. Here's your opportunity, because we're not going to go over enemy territory. We're just going to fly around locally practicing something. So some of the poor guys in there were clerks who were not on flight status at all. But anyway, that shows the coffins laid out and the ceremony that was held there for them. Okay, in January 1944, we moved to Yankai, China, and conditions are a whole lot better. We didn't have snakes, we didn't have mosquitoes. Our food was better. We had nice hot showers at night. We had fresh eggs for breakfast. But what we gained in living conditions, we lost in safety. One day, Ann Sheridan, the movie actress, came out, and the friend that did the cartoons was called upon to put something on the nose of the airplane. So he called it the Sheridan Express. This picture shows after a couple of years, I can see it in my own face at least, I'm standing in the back row on the left, that I was not quite the innocent look that I had when I was 19 years old, that the war had done something toward aging us. Well, we wore these flags on our back, Chinese flag with the words, I'm an American airman, come to help you drive the invaders out of your country, and if you see that I get back to my home base, you'll be rewarded. Oh, and again, we were going after railroad lines, only in China we had to do it at a very low level. And of course, machine gun fire can be very accurate at that level. Okay, then here going after a bridge, again, coming in at low level where you take a lot of chances with the enemy machine gun fire. And we went after airfields. This one was taken at Chiang Mai, Thailand, where we had word that the Japanese were planning a raid against our own territory. So 9 of our airplanes went in there and caught those Japanese bombers on the ground, and that was quite a undertaking that they did. The first 3 months we were in China, we lost 12 of our 16 airplanes, and that was pretty tough. We didn't lose all the crews. As you can see, this one made a belly landing and the crew climbed out the escape hatch on the top. So a lot of people bailed out of the planes. So we lost the plane, but we did not lose the crew in all cases. This was the longest mission I flew. It's down into what was then French Indochina, a place French called Touraine. Name was changed to Da Nang later on when Americans went in there in the Vietnam War. And again, we came in at low level, and you can see bombing facilities along the waterfront and pillboxes out there. If you see a barge out in the river like that in the upper right part of the picture, that's something you should go after. A lot of our missions were targets of opportunity where you get there and look around what looks good. If you see a barge, go after it. If you see a railroad train, go after it. In the lower middle part, there's a railroad train. That's something we would go after, and we did those things. We went after locomotives and we went after barges and ships. And I'm on the right, being awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, and next to it is an Air Medal. Okay, after 53 combat missions, I was allowed to go home. Fortunately, I had not been shot down. I had not had any injuries. I was just one of the grunts that goes along when there's a job to be done. Well, you have to have a certain amount of people that don't get much notoriety, but at least they're the guys that do the job, and I was one of them. The job I had was at Bowling Field, Washington, D.C., flying high-level military people around on their inspection tours. We flew a lot in the C-46, which is a twin beach you see there on the right. In the very middle, you see a man standing up. He's a general, General Howman. And to our left of him is me standing there in the back. And then another thing we had to do at Bowling Field was be an alert officer, meaning we had to go out and meet the planes that came in. And in the middle is Air Chief Marshal Harris, who was head of the Royal Air Force Bomber Command. And to our left of him is General Vandenberg, who had a similar position with our own Air Force, and then another general on the right. And this was our B-25, a great airplane. Oh, another thing we had to do at Bowling Field was to flight test the airplanes that were assigned to the high-level military people as they came out of their maintenance, their sub-depot as we called it. So I had a chance to fly the P-38 up there and the P-47, and that was a real great experience. You don't have anybody up there instructing you how to do it. You just have to go read the tech orders and find out what's the stalling speed and where are all emergency controls, and then get in and do it. And talk about challenges, that was one of the big ones. But it was fun. Well, we formed a organization after the war, the 22nd Bomb Squadron Association, that held annual reunions, and that was the first one I attended. It was up in Reno, Nevada, and that's when they elected me as the Secretary-Treasurer, and that's when I started writing newsletters and books and stories. And there we are at another reunion, and still another one. 6 times now I've been back to China at the invitation of the Chinese government. And on this particular event, I was standing on our old airfield at a place called Yankai, China, in Yunnan province in the southwestern part of China. I'm the one on the right. And it was really quite a thrill to stand there on the old field and imagine, many, many years ago that I was there doing the things that I had to do. A few of the old buildings were left in ruined condition, like that one, okay? Oh, and then Jeannie, my wife, who's back there at the table, joined us, and on a couple of the trips, and on this one, they brought out all these school kids from nearby. We're in a place called Zhejiang, China. It's just where the Japanese laid down their arms to the Chinese. And they had quite a celebration going. They'd bring in those school kids from miles around, all dressed up in their colorful uniforms. Oh, and here's Janie. She's the second from the left there. She's very quick to meet friends there. And then again, banquets galore. This one was put on the CBI is China-Burma-India Hump Airlift 70th anniversary. I'm sitting there, person on the left, okay. Oh, and on one trip, our grandson, Brian, who's on the left there, was with us, and boy, it was quite a thrill to be interviewed by the Chinese television. He really thought that was a big deal, which it was. My artist friend did that one. He called that, "You Are the Wind Beneath My Wings." If you can see closely right in the center, the image of God as it appears in the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, and he just, he did that work, and I thought that was one of his best. Strange things did happen. Boys will be boys, and there's some really human things that went on. First of all, mosquitoes, scorpions, snakes, well, we had them over there in India, and stories can be told about everything involving them. They're primarily in that book, the World War II Diary. An invited guest, one night my friend Wendell Hansen was awakened in the middle of the night. An animal, he said, was 3 feet tall, was staring right at him, and so he pulled out his gun, .45, and fired it, and he said he fired it 4 times, and 3 of the bullets, they all missed the animal, and 3 of them went through the walls into the adjoining rooms, and of course the animal got away, and the next morning his so-called friends were not very friendly at him for shooting through the wall right in where they were sleeping. One night, the fellow in the upper left there is one of these boys that waits on us, and he came running out of his living quarters, "Tiger, tiger," and it turned out that a tiger had crawled through the window of his living quarter and out the front door, and of course it got all the men, had to reach for their .45s and come running out of their bashas and looking for the tiger. By that time the tiger had gone, and the men finally figured, well, it's just as well the tiger left, or we probably would have killed half of the group that's here, shooting our guns widely in all directions. Oh, this one houseboy, he was scared to death of needles because he just didn't want anything to do with it. But we told him, well, that's the way we stay healthy. We get our shots. You really got to do it. But one of our guys was a great show-off, a great teaser, and so we finally talked this houseboy into getting in line to have a shot. Okay, he was willing to do it. But one of our friends who was a great teaser, he faked it. After he got his shot, he fell down. And oh boy, that houseboy, he ran and I never saw him again. He was gone. Oh, that was something, this was our theater at Chakulia, India. And one of our guys was, I couldn't call him a troublemaker, but he was a fun lover. And our movies were pretty dull. They were old, and half the time the sound didn't work, and it's something you'd seen before. So he got a hold of a water buffalo, and he got on it, and he rode the thing right through the theater while everybody was watching the movie. And of course, people will remember that incident a lot more than they will what was being shown that night at the theater. On arrival, they give you this wonderful fresh bread, and you see these little dark specks in there. Oh my gosh, they've got caraway seeds or something in there. Of course, what happens is they bake the bread at night, and while they're kneading the bread, the bugs are flying around in the lantern light, and they get in the dough, and next morning you have bugs in the bread. Oh, first anniversary, someone thought, well, we ought to have a cake. And so we didn't have any ingredients for making any kind of a birthday cake. So in the mess sergeant, he just took 2 old loaves of bread and got out some shaving cream and made it look like cake so people could take a picture of it. And some unsuspecting guy didn't know the difference, and he took a big bite of it, and there he was. Oh, this one, we had a basha we called the Waldorf because it was available to people who were just visiting, or new arrivals, or people who were just passing through for the night. And this one, lieutenant came in and sat down his paraphernalia near his bunk and went off to the officers' club to have a couple of drinks before going to bed. And while he was gone, some fun-loving people, they went out and got a water buffalo, a cow like this, and tied it to the man's bunk. And then they went out and got some chickens that the mess sergeant was planning for dinner the next night and put them inside the man's mosquito netting right on his bed. So, of course, you know what cows do to floors, and you know what chickens do to beds. And when the man came reeling back from the officers' club, ready to go get a good night's sleep, well, you can imagine what he stepped in. And boy, he was so darn mad. He pulled out his .45 and he just went out. I'm gonna get the doggone guys that did this if it's the last thing I do, and firing his gun into the air. And they never saw him again, of course. He was gone the next day. Censoring mail was interesting because we had to take our turn doing that. And oftentimes somebody, this one particular story was written that my friend who was the censor knew the person that wrote the mail, and he was a truck driver. He'd never been in a B-25 in his life and never been in enemy territory at all. And yet he could write the most harrowing stories back home about how he was in this great air battle and boy, they shot at each other and all that. And he was just wondering, when this guy gets home, they're going to want to know, okay, we want to see all your medals, but truck driver, I doubt he's going to have any. Radial engines, the enemy. Our airplanes all had inline engine like an automobile has. The enemy all had these radial engines like a big fan. And so one day one of my friends was out on a mission. They'd gone way out in the South China Sea, hundreds of miles from the nearest friendly base. And he looked out the window and he saw a huge swarm of airplanes coming toward them at the same altitude. And they were obviously, they all had radial engines. And he was saying to himself, well, Mother, you can put a gold star in your window right now because there's no way in the world I'm coming home. And so as the planes got closer, he could see a nice star on the fuselage. It was, he says, oh, he got on the radio and said, okay, man, you can relax now. These are our brown shoe boys from the U.S. Navy. It appeared that there was an aircraft carrier working in our area, and we had absolutely no idea that there was any within 1,000 miles of where we were operating. One of my friends had a chance on leave to go to Darjeeling, which was a very fine vacation spot in India, Nepal, up in the mountains. And they took a narrow gauge railroad to get there and went up to a little hilltop house and were served by these bearers, and they danced at night. And they said, if you want to see Mount Everest with the sun coming up on it, we'll go up to Tiger Mountain, which they did. And sure enough, they saw the sun hitting the tops of Mount Everest and then the mountain next to it. And he said it was the most amazing thing they'd ever seen. We had to take turns being officer of the day, which means you had to go around in a Jeep and make the rounds and make sure that everything was all hunky-dory. You had a driver and a MP with you. And he went around to the little town of Yankai, which is where we were, and inspected the flight line. And when he got there, well, all of a sudden he looked up and saw a group of Chinese bandits surrounding him. So he called out, Sergeant, get up here on the double. I need your help. So the sergeant came with two other people in the Jeep with her, and all of a sudden these bandits disappeared, completely vanished as quickly as they arrived. And a little while later it was reported, and the base sent out a big truck full of hooping and hollering GIs with their guns ready to go, but they never found anybody. Low altitude mission. One of my friends, we did a lot of the sea sweeps out there looking for enemy cargo vessels, hoping we could find one and put a bomb right in the center of it like that. And I know one of my friends, he found a ship and he came in a little too low and ended up with a piece of the mast in the bomb bay of the airplane. It wasn't very nice. So at this time, I'll take any questions you might have. Yes, ma'am. Returning to base, what was our worst fuel problem? Two things come to mind right now. One was that very first mission where we had to land after seeing the Japanese planes swarming around us. we used up a lot of fuel trying to go as fast as we could. So we were going to have to land at Chittagong, a British base, and refuel. But after we got on the ground, they said, you're going to have to leave and go to Calcutta because we are under red alert right now. We're expecting a Japanese air raid. So when we finally landed at Calcutta, we were just about bone dry. But the other situation was on that mission where I said we went to Da Nang in what is now Vietnam, and we realized we did not have enough fuel to get back to our base, but there was an advanced field called Nanning, China, where I felt that we could land, and probably they had some gasoline there. So, well, we got lost finding it, took the wrong turn. That's a long story. Finally got in there and just on vapors and landed at that little base, and they did have some gas. And we got back to our base. We were the last people to come in, and I don't know, might even have been reported missing in action. I don't know. Did any of our squadrons end up in Japanese prison camps? The answer is yes, on 2 occasions. The first one was in September 1942, not long after the famous Doolittle raid. Our squadron participated in a raid on Hong Kong, which, looking back on it, was a very brave, gutsy thing to do. And one of our airplanes was shot down by the Japanese. 2 of the people in the crew managed to get back to friendly lines, but the other 3 ended up in a prison camp and ended up mining coal up in Manchuria somewhere. And there was one case. The next case was one of our crews was sent in to Central Burma to do something we just talked about a minute ago. They were told to go down at low level and try and destroy a dam, a place called Mektilla near Mandalay. And they went down low, and the Japanese anti-aircraft fire shot down the plane. 2 people got out, parachuted from very low altitude, ended up in prison camp. The others were all killed in the crash. All right, how did our B-25s get to India? We had more crews than we had airplanes. So some of us had the luxury of flying over as guests of Pan American Airways, and the others had to fly their own planes over. And that was quite an experience for them to do that. The navigation, particularly that stretch across the South Atlantic Ocean, even landing at Ascension Island and finding it, and then landing and finding West Africa. At least one of our B-25s landed in the wrong place in West Africa, landed up a place, the Vichy French field, occupied by the Germans, and the Germans got a hold of one of our Norden bomb sites that way, so that was not very pleasant at all. What did I like about the B-25s and what did I not like about them? What I liked about them, first of all, I did not have any choice. They told me to go into the B-25, so I had to learn it and like it. So I can only look back on years later and try and compare it with what I know about the other similar planes like the B-26, the Martin Marauder. Well, our airplane, as it turned out, was simpler to fly. I think the Martin Marauder, they used to call that the flying prostitute. Is that the word they used? Well, at any rate, it was a little more dangerous. It had more crashes. The plane we flew just had a reputation of being reliable and was easier to fly, I would say, and could accomplish more for the job. What did I not like about it? One thing worried me about it, that while we were in training, one night one of our B-25s blew up, killed everybody on board. I had the terrible, terrible experience of having to go to the morgue and try to identify the pilot, and I won't go into any detail on that. But I tried to, one thing they taught us in flight training, I think, was to always look back and say, well, now, how could I have done something differently? What could have been done differently to have avoided that? And I know the thing that went through my mind was that we had heaters in our airplanes fed by gasoline heater. And they took the gasoline right out of the fuel tanks and into the heater. And we also in those days had people that smoked a lot. Practically everybody smoked. And I was always afraid that one of these days, things being what they are, the system is not going to work, and gasoline fumes would get into the airplane and somebody would light up a cigarette and boom. I think to this day that that's what happened. And if I were designing an airplane, I would certainly not have a gasoline-fired heater in it. Yes, the question is, when we were in China, did we have any contact with Chenault's Flying Tigers? There's two things I'd like to say about that. That when we moved to China, soon after we arrived, General Chenault came out to our base, and he stood up on the stage, and he welcomed us, and he told us a few things about how we should act, like we should not fraternize with the Chinese women because they consider themselves superior to you. And it's a great insult for them to have had relations with you. It's strange because he already ended up marrying a Chinese woman himself. But he was a very leather-faced fellow with a leather jacket to match. He's loved by everybody because he was one of these people persons that just seemed to register with people, that they loved him. And what he was able to accomplish was amazing. And another part of your story, Flying Tigers, he came out to the base and he said, well, you know, the Flying Tigers was that American volunteer group that came here, and at the beginning of the war, the AVG they called them, and he said, you men can all call yourself Flying Tigers. So that means that I can call myself a Flying Tiger, but I'm a little bit humbled about it because I don't want to give anybody the idea that I was one of those originals. And the first question is, I'm happy to say that I did not destroy any B-25s, although a lot of our people did.
Thank you for watching Peninsula Seniors Out and About here at the Western Museum of Flight in Torrance. I'm Betty Wheaton. I'll see you next time.